All right, today is September 7, 2023. This is the meeting of the Kubernetes Storage Special Interest Group. As a reminder, this meeting is public, recorded, and posted on YouTube. On the agenda today, we're going to go over the items that SIG Storage is committed to for the 129 release. We have previously completed the 128 cycle. If you have anything that you want to discuss, please feel free to add to the agenda. The link is in the calendar invite. We already have a couple of PRs that need attention as well as the design. With that, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the planning spreadsheet to see if we can get some status updates for the 129 items. First up, we have recovery from resize failure, which in 129 stays in alpha. API changes were merged in 128, and we want to add support for QoS. Anyone have any updates on this one? I don't see him on the call. Okay, I'm going to mark that as no update. Next, we'll switch over to provision volumes from cross namespace snapshot PVC. This is continuing design for this cycle. Volume populator is work in progress. Any updates on this one? Ben, Xing, do you know if there's anything going on here?
I think it's still blocked.
Got it.
By the reference grant thing.
Okay. That is blocked. Next item is CSI volume health, additional metrics.
So there is someone who is working on this, but I have not got any update for some time, so I'm checking with her.
Cool, sounds good. Thank you, Xing. Next is change block tracking design.
All right, so here we are targeting alpha. I think the CSS spec and the cap are both ready for review. So Ben is going to review it, right?
Got it. So CSI spec changes are ready for review. Looks like that's the next step.
Right. So we talked about that we tentatively want to cut the release by September 30th, right? For the CSS back release.
Right.
But Ben, do you have any update on this?
It's on my queue to be reviewed, and I should get to it soon. But I haven't actually done the review yet.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you both. Next item is enable privileged containers for Windows to replace CSI proxy for Windows out of tree. Manu, any update on this one?
Manu's out of office today. He let me know to relay that he should be able to give an update next meeting.
Sounds good. Thank you. Okay, let's keep moving. We've got CSI migration stuff. So remove in-tree vSphere. I guess this is for 130. So let's skip over these, and these two are for 131. Next, let's go to always honor reclaim policy.
Right, so we are trying to move to beta in this release, and Deepak is working on the ET tests, and he's going to update the cap shortly.
Awesome. Thank you, Shane. Next is quality of service for volumes, moving to alpha from design phase. Do we have Sunny on the call or anybody with an update?
API PR is ready for review and the demo is ready.
Got it. So I heard API is ready for review and demo is ready as well.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Next item is PV last phase transition time. Roman or anybody else able to give an update here?
Is that the same one as the last row? Is that a new thing that was just added?
No, this is add the timestamp field in the PV status.
Oh, that one. Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry. Name confused me.
Okay, I'm gonna mark this one as no update for now. Next is storage capacity scoring. Any updates on this one?
So I think Michelle has been following up on this, right, Michelle?
Yeah, I did an initial review of it. I haven't had a chance to see what the latest comments are, though. I think there has been some progress in this area.
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle. Next are the set of items that are co-owned by multiple SIGs. This one is co-owned between SIG storage and SIG apps, volume expansion for stateful sets. Any updates on this one from anyone? Okay, hopefully we'll get an update on this when Hemant is able to attend. We're gonna move over to the next one. This one's co-owned with SIG node, non-graceful node shutdown tests.
So this is just trying to get the integration test merged. So I just pinged Ashutosh to address the review comments.
Got it. Cool, thank you, Sheng. Next we have auto delete PVCs with stateful set. It looks like this is new. I think we had this in any previous.
So this is, I believe this has been beta for a while, right? Michelle, I think you said you're going to check with Matt.
Yeah, I have not had a chance to do that, but I'll work on that.
And this is was beta or is moving to beta?
It's already beta, I think, right, Michelle? It's beta. We're trying to we might want to move to GA, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And who's the primary dev lead here?
Matt?
Matt Carey.
Yeah.
Cool. And API reviewer or normal reviewer?
Michelle, right? Michelle has been.
I'll put your name down. Okay, we'll start tracking this one. I'll put no update for now. And we had one more item added here, which is add option to disable 6-minute force detach timer. I'll put the description here.
So this one, I think the PR is up, and it's being reviewed.
Got it. Okay, that's great. Mark that as started, and this is going to be bug level, or is there going to be a cap?
So I think the way that we're thinking about this is as slow deprecation. The goal should be to eventually deprecate the feature, but this is like an optional deprecation to sort of test the water before we propose an actual deprecation.
Got it. So I think
So-
there's two pieces, right? One is to add the option for disabling 6-minute and then
Right,
eventually do the deprecation.
that's what the PR does. The PR adds the option to disable it,
Got it.
and then
And I
next
guess
release we may come back and try to formally deprecate.
that makes a lot of sense. So I guess question is, does this PR require a KEP or is it going in as effectively a bug fix?
We're considering it a bug fix.
Bug fix. Okay, that makes sense. So for this cycle, we'll call it a bug fix, and then when we come back to try to do a deprecation, we will need to do we'll need to go and do a proper KEP for it.
Do we do caps for deprecations? That doesn't make sense to me.
I think we'll need to talk to folks like Jordan, SIG folks to make sure. I think generally speaking, when you have a change of behavior, especially when there's like a deprecation or something, there might be a KEP requirement. I'm not certain, so we should follow up.
We would definitely want release notes, and to follow the proper deprecation procedure.
Right.
I have to think that there have been other things that have been deprecated without caps, but if that's the current stance that we need it, then we would do that next release, I guess.
Yeah,
I
I'm
think
not-
in terms of say like we recently deprecated like the Ceph plugins. I think those did not go through a cap. It was just an issue where we were discussing.
Got it. Okay, so that may be the case. So hopefully we can keep it low cost here as well. So PR adding knob is ready, and who created the PR? That's Rohit.
Yeah, that was Rohit.
Perfect. And who's helping review this one?
I intend to review it, but I haven't done. That's another one on my list of reviews.
Got it.
I don't know who else has already taken a look at it.
Okay. Anybody else interested in reviewing? Okay, I'll preliminarily put down Ben, and hopefully we can get some other eyes on it as well.
I can also review it. I think this is in the area
Yeah,
related to the non-graceful node shutdown.
sounds good. Thank
Yes,
you.
in fact, that's the justification for deprecating this feature is now that we have non-graceful node shutdown, the original behavior doesn't make sense anymore.
Yep, that makes sense. Okay, so we're done with the 129 planning spreadsheet. I'll switch back to our agenda doc. So first item is from Rain, PRs to discuss. Do we have him on the call?
Yes, I'm on the call. I can go ahead if you
Right, go
want.
for it.
All right. Last meeting, thank you very much. We brought a PR for review and approve. It's merged. It's ran flake-free for the 2 weeks that's required. Except there was a flake that is linked to, if you look at the hyperlink that I've got in there, it's a known flake related to an API machinery test. So the flake is not related to the storage test. We thoroughly checked it, and it only flaked once in the first 24 hours. After that, it ran perfectly smooth. So we will promote that test Monday morning, New Zealand time. So your Sunday. And then we'll also take the same information in another hour to SIG architecture to discuss there as well. So they'll also be aware. Then we're making good progress. We brought another PR yesterday for another E2E test with the idea to promote it to conformance once we've got the 2 weeks flake free. Already got an LGTM, so we'll appreciate if we can get an approve on that as soon as we can get the senior people of the SIG to review it for us. And that will kill another 7 endpoints of technical debt.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And yeah, we will help take a look at these. Folks on the call who have approval permissions, please help take a look at that PR.
Thank you very much. And then we're gonna look at some status endpoints. So we hope to remove 23. These take us to 20, and we're looking at another 3. So hopefully 23 endpoints for this release of technical debt to be killed.
Nice. Cool. Thank you so much.
Thanks for all the support.
Next we have Gnome. Gnome, are you on the call by any chance? Okay, we got pinged offline by Gnome to help review this CL. It is in the external provisioner library, and it is addressing this issue. So please help take a look at this PR as well. So we got a couple of PRs that need attention today. All right, with that, I will switch it over to design reviews and hand it off to Mauricio. We didn't have enough time last meeting to discuss this. So Mauricio, I'll stop sharing and I'll let you drive.
Okay, thank you.
I just made you co-host, so you should be able to share your screen.
Okay, sounds good. So in the meeting notes, I posted a link to this presentation, and a couple of weeks ago, we already talked about the background of this proposal. So I'll continue from that point and just talk about the proposal. So just as a summary of what I discussed the last meeting, with our current model with CSI sidecars in many repos, we have a few problems like changes in Go dependencies, which cascade to many repos. There are also changes in CSI release tools, for example, to change the Go runtime. Those also need to cascade to all of the CSI sidecar repos. And also, for each sidecar, we have, as a community, to create many releases per Kubernetes release. There is also some confusion about what versions of sidecars to use on the deployments. This is usually a task done by cluster administrators. And one problem that I didn't explain in the slides that I learned from Jan was that it's possible that the deployment of a driver has some requirements for the sidecars, like a minimum memory request. And because we are using like 4 sidecars, the resource allocation needed is multiplied too. So, for example, in a CSI driver deployment that has 4 sidecars, those would be provisioner, attacher, resizer, snapshotter, each one taking 50 megabytes. That would be a total of 200, and that's just on an empty cluster. So I also talked about this in the previous meeting, about why we have so many projects. I'll just skip this slide. And the proposal is to combine the source code of all of the sidecars to a single repo, creating a mono repo. So in the diagram, we have on the left the current state, and on the right the proposed state. We have at least six sidecars that we regularly use. Those are attacher, provisioner, snapshotter, resizer, liveness probe, and node driver register. We also have additional controllers like health monitor. There's also another controller in a snapshotter. There are also tooling that helps in the releases and in the dependencies. So release tool has all of that tooling. We also have lib external provisioner, which has utilities, and that's a dependency of provisioner. And we also have this library called CSI lib utils, which has lots of utility code for all of the sidecars to do the connection with the socket. So the idea is to move all of the code of these components into a mono repo. The code would be under a repo, let's say in the folder pkg. And then we will also move release tools to be part of this repo. So it will be a folder here. And finally, libx or CSI libutils, that would be part of this repo too. And it would be in a place similar to what happens in Kubernetes. Kubernetes has this folder called staging, which has all of the Go module dependencies that all of the core components of Kubernetes need. And in addition to just having these components as part of the repo, they have a requirement that other people might be using these additional dependencies. So to avoid all of these other third-party consumers from importing the entire Kubernetes code base, they set up infrastructure to push these directories in staging to their own repos in the Kubernetes GitHub org. So I think we could do something like that too. And that's this orange arrow. So we would need to set up something with Kubernetes, something related with Kubernetes publishing bot to push these changes from master automatically. Yeah, was there any question?
Yeah, I've got two questions. So this is not only the sidecars, but also the libraries. I hadn't realized you would want to pull in the libraries too. What is the logic there?
The problem with CSI libutils is that it's a dependency of all of the sidecars, and whenever there is a change in CSI libutils, it needs to be propagated to all of the sidecars too.
Well, what about the external provisioner one?
So,
like, isn't there a reason that it's a library today?
I think that's covered here. Maybe Michelle has more background about why that library was created and why it is in Kubernetes 6. I was not sure when I created these slides if this library would be part of the repo, given that it's only used in this stack by provisioner. I know there are other third-party consumers.
Yeah, so at least back in the day before CSI, right, we did have this other thing with external provisioners that use this library. And so when we initially created this library, like we decided to put it outside of CSI because it was being used by non-CSI external provisioners. But I think now that we have Go modules, I think it's possible to put it all into a single repo, but we could potentially, release a separate Go module for it to still support those older use cases.
Okay, so you're saying no one's using it as a library except for maybe some legacy things?
Yes, at least no one should be.
Okay. All right, so that suggests even if we don't do the mono sidecar, we might still want to collapse that library into external provisioner just because.
Yes.
Okay. So my other question then is, assuming we do this, how do we handle new alpha sidecars? If we've already started talking, about doing a backup, or not a backup, sorry, a change block tracking sidecar to enable backup applications. So like, assuming that this work had already been done, would a new sidecar like just be added to the mono repo, or would it still be a separate thing that would go through alpha, beta, GA before getting absorbed into this mono repo?
So Michelle had some ideas in this area. One of those ideas was to include it as part of the repo and control its deployment through feature gates. The good thing is that the alpha library would take advantage of all of the logic all of the release deployment logic that is part of the monorepo. So we wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel to, let's say, what we currently do for CSI release tools is we import it as a GitHub module. That would no longer be done. Also, for the cluster administrator, that would be easier to just pull that alpha feature because it's part of the monorepo already in some release. Instead, well, right now, what we would need to do to have an alpha feature is we would first need to set up all of this pipeline to build the component internally before we can start using it.
So once we have this in place, I think that makes sense, right? But right now we don't have this monorepo yet. But we are trying to get CBT to alpha in 1.29. So
Well, yeah, I think for CBT we're going to have to do the existing thing. I'm trying to think ahead. You know, that CBT won't be the last new thing that might need a sidecar, and I'm trying to figure out like if we have experimental stuff where we want to try out a new idea, it might fly, it might not fly. Is there a downside to putting it into this repo and then like maybe later deciding it was a bad experiment and having to get rid of it? Like, will we create new problems by having all the code in one place and having a single release process that's not flexible? That's my worry. Is how do you do experiments that might fail in a monorepo setting like this? Feature gates seem like a reasonable idea. Like, but I remember when we added a snapshotter, we put all of the API objects in the snapshotter repo, and that resulted in the need to like bump the major version of the repo like 5 times. So I think the most recent version of external snapshotter is like 6 point something, right? I'm worried about how do we handle versioning for like new stuff that needs to go through, alpha, beta, GA cycles. How do you version those if there's just one version number on the whole repo? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's true. That's actually something that I haven't talked a lot about. Michelle brought some ideas. Initially, I thought that this monorepo would only hold projects that have reached beta status, but she suggested that maybe we could reuse the same infra for new projects too. I think that going to a monorepo makes Kubernetes CSI look a lot like Kubernetes. So on the good side, I feel that a lot of the problems around alpha things are already or maybe already solved in upstream Kubernetes. So if we want to do something similar, we would just need to read what they did.
Yeah, but Kubernetes, they always just bump the minor version, right? They don't bump major version, but our version is different, right?
Well,
They have certain things we just bump the major version.
And the strategy in upstream Kubernetes was to say for experimental stuff, like we don't want it, right? Do your experimental stuff in another repo and then only bring it into Kubernetes after you've proven that it's a real thing and that people want it and that it works, so on and so on. So my worry here is the same, right? If someone wants to do something experimental that may or may not work out, there's going to be an incentive to like not integrate it into the repo because of the churn that it will cause and the headache that it will, the impact on everyone who actually uses these sidecars, having experimental code go in and then maybe get ripped out, people won't want that to happen on their production sidecars. So it creates another incentive then to like push experimental stuff somewhere else.
I guess the main challenge though, so I would prefer everything. I would prefer we go all in on one model instead of having to support like 2 different models, because it will simplify our tooling, right? We don't have to maintain 2 different kinds of processes depending on if something is experimental or not. And then so I just feel like from like a maintenance standpoint, it's a lot easier if we just have a single model that we can support.
But we also have backwards compatibility concerns, right? Like even if everyone agrees, like, yes, let's do this, let's put it all in a mono repo, let's do everything that way, you still have thousands of, or hundreds of CSI drivers with, that are deployed
Yes,
with
I mean,
the existing sidecars.
There's definitely gonna be like a rollout and upgrade plan that we have to do to move to this, right? But I think, in the final state, I don't want the final state to have to be to like juggle these two different models. 'Cause
Okay,
that
so
doesn't really solve the problems the maintenance problems we're trying to solve.
so you're talking about like 3 years from now when everything has been deprecated
Yes.
and it's all and everyone's on the new model, and then there's only one way to do things. Okay. Yeah, because I think it's inevitable that there'll be some multi-year period where we'll be doing both things and continuing to support the old way for all of the existing deployed CSI drivers.
All right, yeah, those were great points. So I didn't take notes, but I'm gonna watch this video again.
I added some notes in the doc.
Oh, thank you, thank you. All right, so going into more details about the repo. Well, I think that right now we're also in a good time to make this switch. Probably before it was not, we didn't have enough tooling to do this, but now with Go Workspaces we can link CSI libutils to all of the sidecars through Go Workspaces, and also make CSI libutils available to third-party consumers by using the Kubernetes publishing bot infra. I think there is a lot of work there to set that up, because that repo was made with the intention to work with Kubernetes. So if we want to reuse the infra, we need to understand how that works and apply it to our repo. Also part of this mono repo is that we would have a new entry point. It would be a new Go file that is very similar to Kube Controller Manager. Kube Controller Manager enables some controllers, it bundles through the controllers flag, so we can do something like that. And this is how the deployment looks now and how it could look like. So in the current state, we have the CSI driver in both control plane and worker node. In the control plane, we have like 5 sidecars sometimes, and in the worker node, 2 sidecars. Each sidecar has its own version. And in the new model, we will have just one sidecar with the same version, but with different flags. In the control plane, the sidecar, like this is a rough sketch of how it will look like. So the container for the sidecars will have this additional controllers flag, similar to Kube Controller Manager, which decides which controllers to enable. There would also be flags that are common across all of the sidecars. For example, leader election flags, which right now are handled per sidecar. There would also be some variables that affect properties of all of the sidecars, like a global timeout. And it's possible that each sidecar has its own needs for a timeout, for example. So we could have the same variable prefixed with the name of the sidecar so that it only affects that sidecar. And in the node pool, it will be very similar. We only deploy a couple of components. We have node driver register and liveness probe. Yeah, that's how it will look like. As part of the design, I was thinking how this would impact our current development process. And there are definitely some characteristics that are quantifiable, which this table is covering. So right now, assuming that we have 6 sidecars, the effort to propagate CSI release tools, for example, whenever there is a Go runtime change, That means that we have to create number of CSI release tools changes times number of sidecars. But in the mono repos, given that CSI release tools is part of the repo, then we just have to make the CSI release tool changes. So it becomes 0 in terms of number of PRs done to other repos. Similarly in CSI libutils, we no longer have to make PRs to other repos. For Go mod dependency bumps, for example, let's say there is a Go dependency that created a new release fixing a vulnerability. That would mean that it needs to be propagated across all of the sidecars, but not only the latest version of the sidecar, because it could be possible that previous versions of the sidecar are still using that library with a vulnerability, so it needs to be backported. So that's why there is this last term, times CSI releases supported. So this is also sort of an unknown area. We have a period of time where we say we're going to support 1 year of releases, and we could have many releases in that year. And let's say that in the new model, if we adopt something like what Kubernetes does, where they have a release, a minor release every 4 months, then we know exactly how many releases we need to backport it to. It would be the last 2 releases. So because we also have no sidecars, that number of sidecars becomes 1. So the total number is number of dependency changes times number of CSI releases supported. So current time update, I think this is, I talk about this in CSI release tools, something similar. And also one number that's important is the number of releases that we will have. So right now we make 1 release per sidecar, but if it's a mono repo, then we just have 1 release for the entire mono repo. There are also a lot of pros in this approach. I added a link to a presentation done by the person that did the staging work in Kubernetes. There are lots of benefits of having just mono repos. We have easy releases. We no longer need to worry about having many components, each having its own release cycle. Easier testing too. This means that, let's say that there is a feature that affects 2 sidecars at the same time, that thing could be tested at once. We no longer need to create 1 test for, let's say that a sidecar moves ahead first and then do some testing and wait for the other sidecar to keep up before doing more testing. Then there are global changes. This is like CSI release tools and CSI libutils. No need to propagate them to all of the sidecars. Easier integration of sidecars. This is about the deployment manifest and how it would look like. This pro is assuming that we would have a release model aligned with Kubernetes. And there are other pros too related with the code itself. Now that we have 1 component, which we could use a shared informer so that we decrease the memory usage. We also no longer need to make multiple API requests in the case where multiple sidecars are trying to fetch the same type of object. There is also, as we saw, consolidation of parameters that are common across all of the sidecars, like leader election, structure login. And there is this last one, which is related with the alpha feature. So if an alpha feature is part of the repo, then it would be built as part of it. So that means that a cluster administrator could start using it without setting up pipelines to build the project first. So there are always going to be cons. The first con is that, let's say the alpha feature, if it's moving too fast, it's still tied to the release cadence of the monorepo. So we would no longer be able to do single releases per component. That's what we currently can do with the sidecars. There are also a few libraries that are not used only by sidecars, like CSI libutils. But we could do the staging mirroring. Then there was also the con of expressing per sidecar configurations, and I added an idea of how we could do this with prefixes. And there are a lot of things around defining how development would look like in this new repo, like alpha features or other components, like CSI test, which is not part of this proposal. So that's a problem. How do we define when a component is part of the report net? Yeah, and there are a few more cons related with infra setup, like longer build times. And let's say that we have this one repo, and if a subcontroller dies, then the entire would that mean that the entire project, the entire binary just dies? Or do we define that boundary where an error needs to be propagated all the way until some point? And do we need to restart the entire container, or should we just restart the controller? I think we would need to read a lot about how Controller Manager does it. And there are a few risks. These are also related with the development workflow in the new repo. So let's take volume snapshots, for example. Recently, it went from V4 to V6. So these were major bumps. And would this mean that if a component like this goes through iterations that make it force to have a major breaking change, would that mean that it's the same for the entire repo? We could take that approach, or we could do like what Kubernetes does, where they say they have just minor bumps, and on some minor bump they decide to deprecate stuff, something like that.
Well, I think the versioning issue with the external snapshotter was because the API objects were in the same repo. So when you wanted to change the API objects, like we considered that a major version, because there were things that pulled the API objects out of the external snapshotter sidecar into other things, like the snapshot controller, right? Snapshot controller imports the snapshot objects from the external snapshotter repo. And so it needed to be, so my question would be like, for things that have API objects that are used outside of the sidecars, like snapshots, would we try to pull the API objects into their own place? Or would we keep them in the monorepo?
I think that external snapshotter, that repo, contains 3 projects. There is a snapshot controller, there is...
Oh, that's right. Snapshot controller is right there in the same project. Yeah, right. I forgot.
Yeah, and I think I added it in this diagram. So if you see here, there is a client folder, and that has the API for snapshotter. So yes, those CRDs will be part of this repo.
So like there will be more things in the future like that. You know, new API objects that will go through alpha, beta, GA. Are we okay just sort of putting them in there in that client directory and gradually expanding it, and not doing major version bumps as those API objects evolve? Is that going to be okay?
Well, initially I thought that they could be part of this repo, but if I can definitely analyze if they can be moved away from this repo. Just the client part, let's say API CRDs, but the code for it for these components to work, like the snapshot controller or CSI snapshotter, those would still be part of this repo. I honestly don't know also what happens in Kubernetes. For Kubernetes CSI, I do think that volume snapshots, it's like a core component. So taking Kubernetes as an example, Kubernetes also bundles core components within it. So I guess it would be something similar for Kubernetes CSI, where we
Right,
bundle.
but there was a time when they weren't a core component, right? There was a time when they were experimental. And so I'm trying to figure out what is the on-ramp for a new experimental feature to become eventually a GA thing. Does it just start here and spend its whole life here? Does it start somewhere else and then move here at some point?
Right.
I don't have the answer.
Yes, I also don't know the answer yet. I'm gonna hopefully make more progress and defining that the answer for that question. I still don't know. Okay, so yeah, I can move. It's okay if I just move on?
Yeah.
Okay, so oh, I was talking about the risks. I talked about the breaking change in CRDs. That for us it meant a major bump. What would that mean in this new model? Also about vulnerabilities. Now that we have a mono repo, which is a union of dependencies, there is a higher chance of having more vulnerabilities reported for the entire mono repo, and that would affect like the entire component, not only one part of it. And there are a couple of things that are still pending in the definition of the problem, like what happens moving forward once we have, let's say, a stable model of this. How do we define, how does the transition period look like, where we have a deployment with all of the sidecars, each one on its own container, and how would that move to having one container that has all of the sidecar code? I still don't know that. Okay, so there is a design doc in the meeting notes. It's also here. I'm currently working on this last part of identifying risks. I will also work on the CRDs, if they should be part of the repo or if they should not. Also, I'll think more about alpha features. And if you're interested in working on this project, which, as we saw, simplifies the deployment of all the CSI drivers, then you can reach out to me on Slack. In the doc, I have identified a few milestones that we could achieve for this project. The first milestone was to try this out in an experimental repo where I combined external attacher, CSI release tools, and CSI libutils, and I linked them all with Go workspaces. And it looked fine, but it's an experiment. It's not something ready to be used in production, especially because we have one of the issues that we should solve is how do we, for example, take all of the CSI sidecar code and import it into a monorepo, preserving Git history. I think that's a very important problem, and that's one milestone, and I already found some problems. So yeah, if you're interested in this area, please let me know. Yeah, thank you.
I think you're also going to have additional challenges because you got to keep the old sidecars around for some amount of time before we can actually delete them, right? So there will be a period of time when you'll have like 2 copies of release tools and 2 copies of external provisioner, because you'll be maintaining the old one for stable releases while you're releasing the new one. And you'll have double the work for whatever the transition period is, whether it's a year or 2 years or,
Yes.
the deprecation time.
Yeah, definitely. So one of the ideas that I had for this was that development should still continue on the sidecars. And for the monorepo, we could export all of the diffs that are happening in all of these other sidecar repos and start importing them into the monorepo progressively. So I had that idea. Well, actually, Hamant had that idea, and it involves just exporting diffs with this command and applying them with this command. But there are already some problems that I found. But yeah, that's the plan. It's not to have two models working at the same time. It's more about having the CSI sidecars development going just fine, and then importing them into the monorepo progressively. And at some point, we definitely need to make a hard cut where we say we're no longer gonna make changes in the sidecars repos, and instead the development should go into the monorepo. And same thing for resources.
I guess if we do that, we need to like formally deprecate the existing model once the new model is consumable, so that the storage vendors who are shipping the sidecars know that they have to change something by some deadline, right? And then give them a deadline, like this is going away a year from now, or 18 months from now, or 9 months from now, whatever the, start the clock ticking, because there's all the different vendors are going to have to change their deployment process to use this new thing.
Right, yes. Yeah, that will happen at some point. Once we know that this model is working, first with hostpath, and then maybe we can try it out in some drivers, and then we would say, okay, this is when we are going to switch to the new model, and you will have this timeline to do it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll stop sharing, but yeah, feel free to reach out in Slack.
All right, thanks a lot, Mauricio. Any other questions for Mauricio related to monorepo for the sidecars? All right, thanks a lot, Mauricio, for the presentation. Let's take the discussion to the design doc, which is linked in the spread in the agenda doc. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Mauricio directly as well. With that, I think we are at the end of the items for today. Anything else before we go? All right, thank you very much. We'll end it for today.
Thanks.